Okay, welcome to Monday night's live broadcast here on LinkedIn Live. And today we're also streaming this on YouTube, so might get some comments over there as well. But it'd be good to have a chat with our guests here on LinkedIn Live, where we'll be taking most of the comments or feeding back. Now, sometimes it's quite difficult to talk about certain subjects you can talk about all day. Others, it's not so long, but I'd love to have your opinion on this. I've had lots of people over the years always make comments on the interview process and how that can be improved. So today we're just going to touch on the interview process, and I would love to have your feedback. And if you're interested in finding out more or talking about more about your experiences, which is what I'm really interested in, please let me know. And I'm just bringing up on my phone so I can make sure I've got that going as well, and feedback to any comments. If you've got any comments on your experience of the interview process, you can just put it in the comment section, and I'd love to talk to you about that as well. So the reason I wanted to bring this up and talk about the comments is because I want to find out what people's experience are with the interview process. Now, the interview process for many people can be drawn out, can be very long. For others, it can be short, depending on the type of role that they're perhaps applying for. Particularly in my professional network, where you're generally placing senior professionals, that interview process can be quicker than most, but it also depends if it's perhaps for a permanent position, if it's for a contract role, what the type of technology, or perhaps if it is technology driven, or if it's more a person's skills, experience, but also the communication style, that can really impact how long that interview process is. The size of the organization can have a massive impact. You probably know some of the bigger, larger companies out there could have 5, 6, or 7 stage interview processes, which is incredible that they can keep those people engaged throughout the whole process and keep them on that journey. And I'm sure people have had experience of being interviewed by some of the bigger companies that have those longer processes. I think a lot of organizations and a lot of hiring teams, often or not, will change their tack slightly as the interview process goes on. Perhaps they're sometimes finding their way. They might have to change how they approach the interviews, how they do it. So we'll be talking more about that today as well. Love to be talking a lot about this today and have that conversation. It'll also be how those interviews are conducted. So it might be a phone interview. It could be a Skype interview. They might be using Microsoft Teams. They might be using Slack. They could be using a number of different channels. And then it will be going straight to maybe a face-to-face. It might not even be a face-to-face required by that organization. So again, it really depends on so many different aspects. And again, this is a really important point. And I'll tell you why. It's important because that recruiter, or indeed that internal recruitment team, or someone else in the organization, could have been spending weeks, months, or even in some cases years nurturing that candidate, that person, through to get them to come in for an interview. When it all falls down at the interview process, and often or not, you've heard it, and I'm sure people have got experience of this, where that candidate has been left down in reception or left in a room. Nobody's got to them. And of course, everyone's busy. The person interviewing them has got busy, got delayed, and perhaps they haven't even come out and offered them a drink. So that experience for that candidate is really, really impacted. And often or not, that candidate's already made up their mind that they don't want to work for that company. And it could have taken that person, as I said, months to get to that position. So it's really important that you, as organizations, you've really thought deeply about your interview process. What can be tightened up? Who's accountable for it? Who's responsible for it when that person comes on site? And again, I'm sure my network's got experience of having bad interviews. Some people might have had experience of having good interviews. And again, I'd love to hear what people have been doing. What can you do to prevent these kind of things? I mean, it goes back to setting up good process in an organization. It's someone who's taking accountability. If you're using external recruiters, usually, they should be on top of their game because they want to support you. And they should be making sure that those interviews are set up. They've got calendars in their inbox. And often or not, what happens, we're human beings. People sometimes forget that the interview's taking place. So it doesn't take much to put that quick call in the morning or in the afternoon before the interview to make sure that interview is going to take place. The candidate's briefed, they're remembered, and they've got everything they need to make a successful outcome. often or not, and again, I'm sure there's some stories out there, I've certainly heard them over the years, where perhaps someone's gone for a face-to-face interview, they've turned up at the wrong location, the location wasn't clear, that customer has multiple sites, and in fact, they've gone to the wrong place. Sometimes or not, you'll have people that are so not ashamed, maybe they feel a bit embarrassed to make a call in because they don't have clear directions, they don't know where they're going, and they just give up on the interview altogether, and then you never hear from that person again. And again, it's such a shame that preparation, that work that's been put in to finding that candidate, to enticing them, to wooing them to your organization, has then had that experience of not getting in the door even, and having that chance to have a conversation. So I think those things can be really thought about, and someone again has to think about what would it really be like for you if you were going for an interview. What can you do to ensure that person has a smooth experience of going there? Mark, thanks for your comment on this. The best interviews have been conversations, not a set of questions. Tell me about. Yeah, great point, Mark. And I think obviously when you're getting down to the actual interview itself and having a one-to-one with someone, often or not, having those conversations, those coffee conversations to talk about more about the objectives of the role, what the objectives are to do the role, and how you go about, I guess, the challenges and how you go about achieving those objectives. So great to have your comment, Mark, and anything else that you've had of experience of, I'd love to know as well. Often or not now, we live in a global environment, and we live in multiple time zones where stakeholders can be in multiple countries. They might be moving and traveling between their sites. And this can be an area where things can go wrong in the interview process. So again, having a good structure and a good process in place is really, really important. Now, it might be that you have one person in the organization that's helping you support that. It could be one of your team coordinators. It might be an EA, an executive assistant. It could be one of the internal talent acquisition teams, or if you might not have that, so it just might be that recruitment partner or that internal person that's helping coordinate. But that's really, really important. And again, you're thinking about what's the time zone going to be for where the stakeholders are. Is it going to work for them? Can you get everyone on the line and ensure that they're there for when the candidate's there? Now, I'm a firm believer in the fact that, and often or not, this is forgotten, but the candidate's time, believe it or not, is just as important as the hiring managers. So they're also taking time out of their busy day to make sure they are available. And there's nothing worse than sitting in an interview room, whether that's online, virtual, or face-to-face, or whatever. But there's nothing worse than waiting for people to join the call. It really doesn't set the tone well. And I know everyone's busy, but first impressions make a big difference. And you're looking to attract star people. I think it's really important to give the common courtesy to make sure you're there, make sure you're on time, and giving them the time and respect that professional candidate deserves. Again, I'm sure there's been examples of this where you haven't heard of, people haven't turned up. You're 15 minutes in waiting for them, and you've either said, look, you've got to get back to the work. Often or not, then it's reorganized, but that moment may have gone. You might have lost that candidate's interest. Someone else might be faster and slicker and might secure that person instead of you. So you've lost all that work. So that would be a real shame if you do that. And again, I'd love to hear what people have had experience of setting up interviews, what people experience have, especially across time zones. I mean, it's pretty easy these days with calendars, making sure that you've got the calendar in the right location. And again, someone could check in before that call, 15 minutes before, to ensure that that's starting with a text, with a WhatsApp, or even a phone call, a conference call into them. You can use Calendly, I think it's called. You can use that and many other apps as well. I use Microsoft Teams, but there's many other apps that you can use to ensure that you set that up. So that's really important as well. I'll take that point from you, Matthew. Matthew, thanks for joining us, and thanks for the comment. I'm going to read this out because it's on my screen. I spent a year of experiencing, without exception, great interviews, many relaxed conversations, which have resulted in negative outcomes. Companies not following through, changing resource strategies is the heartbeat and outright falsehood. Yeah, I mean, this is a great point, Matthew, and I think the company's not following through is a good point. Now, whether or not that's a change of direction or something we're not aware of within that organization, I guess, and it's very difficult to manage that, but I'm guessing, what can you do as a candidate to try and minimize that happening? Is there questions that you can ask on the interview that might give you better idea of what's going to happen next? Perhaps what that follow-up process is. I think also on the interview, you can get a good idea of if they're serious by asking questions around what's the next steps, when will those next steps be, how many other candidates are you considering, what's the objectives for the business, when do those timelines need to be met. I think those are kind of indicators that might give you that clarity. But you're right, it's very, very difficult, Matthew. I see this a lot more. People at the market is telling that's happening a lot more. So I guess I don't know what your thoughts are. And I'd love to hear what you think is the way that you can overcome that. A little bit of to some degree going out and speaking to more organizations, but I think it's trying to get that clarity. And I guess it starts back with the recruiter, asking the right questions at the start of that process, whether that's an internal recruiter, whether it's external partner that's qualifying that, to try and understand the timelines, to try and understand the seriousness of that role. Often or not, we haven't touched on this now, but I'll bring it up while I'm just thinking about it, is often or not, you don't even know if it is an external that they are going to be hiring, because there may be part of the process, particularly in some organizations, where they may need to go through those motions while they are considering an internal candidate for the role. And of course, that's always a difficult one, because it may be that they have to do that as part of their process. It may be that actually they can bring that person in. And I'm sure that's happened with other people before as well. So that's always a challenge as well. We'll take this question. Gary, nice to see you. Thank you for joining us on the LinkedIn. What happens if it becomes obvious that as a contractor, you have a greater... this is a great question. I'll say it again. What happens if it becomes obvious that as a contractor, you have greater knowledge or skills than the interviewer? Well, that's a great question. I don't have the answer for you there, Gary. I guess it also depends how that person views you on the call, because of course, often or not, and Gary, I'm sure you've seen this, you can see that can be, to some people, it might be seen as a threat. You may be seen as a threat to that person, but equally, they're bringing you in, or hopefully they're bringing you in especially as a very skilled professional contractor with a set of objectives, clear objectives to get the job and get the job done. And I think all you can ever be, Gary, is humble. Because of course you don't know, we all don't know what they're thinking and what their objectives are, but you can only be humble and do your best and give your best, because you want to deliver great results for that customer. But again, I don't think it's everyone. And actually, it might be, and we see years, I'm sure other people will tell me that as well. You might be able to deliver real value to that person who perhaps doesn't have as much knowledge or skills in you, and actually you can turn that into a call where actually you can add that additional value to that stakeholder, that person that's interviewing you, and actually help them upskill. So try and look at it as a positive. I know it's a difficult one, but this does happen as well. And I think we had there, you should use that knowledge for your advantage. You should use it for your advantage, but I think also, as I said, is let's try and give back and give value. And I think that your name and your professionalism will be long respected after you've left that organization. And it might be you're coming back to that company, or might be working with that stakeholder in the future. But I'd love to talk more about that one as well. That's a great question, Gary. I'm glad you asked that one as well. So those are some of the things that are coming up. I'd love to know what the other challenges are, what people are seeing as the challenges. I know, again, a lot of the fall down can be going back to the basics. Have they thought about the interview process in the first place? It can be, if you're sending your CV into an organization and it's taking 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get feedback on your CV, you're already working on lots of other stuff potentially. If you're a contractor, we all know that the market moves much quicker than that, and you could have your CV in with multiple companies. So it's really important as well that there's timely feedback from those stakeholders. And again, the best ones the best companies, the ones that are really diligent and want to get results, who are strategic in their outcomes, who really want to add value to the business, will have already given a set of, right, okay, we're gonna get these candidates in by a certain date. We're then going to pre-book some slots in our calendar to interview these candidates. If that goes well, if that succeeds, we're going to pre-book that time in if we need to see them again for whatever reason. And actually, allocating time at the start of the process is what keeps the ball rolling. It's when you have people that obviously don't do that, are not there, then they take the CVs and they go off on holiday for 2 weeks. I'm sure people have heard that one before. Can be very frustrating for all. Or in fact, they've gone through the interview process, excuse me, they've gone through the interview process and they don't have any budget. The budget hasn't been approved. They're waiting for budget, or there's an approval chain up to HRD or the CEO if it's permanent. And perhaps those steps could take a large amount of time. So actually, what happens there is it's wasted everyone's time. The candidate's upset because they're not getting communicated with, they're not hearing an update. The internal team are a little bit frustrated because they spent all that time in nurturing their candidates or working with that external third party. And it just gives a bad impression for everyone. So easier said than done, of course. Those are easier things that are said than done. But that's what tends to happen out there. And again, the best companies are moving quickly, they're moving diligently. Equally, you can't rush these things. So, those companies need to make sure that they are bringing in the right resources. They want to make sure they've got a good process in place to ensure that they can minimize the risk of making the wrong hire for their business and their business objectives. But I think there's a lot of things that can be done to work up the, to get it better and get it better. I think it goes back to even, and we're not to touch on it too much today unless anyone wants to bring it up, but even going back to how that interview process takes place when you're in the company. Now, it's probably much more important to a permanent candidate perhaps than a contractor. Contractors, tend to have been in organisations, have seen it, been there, and are quite open to that interview process. But when you walk in, that first experience of how you are treated when you walk in the door, when you come and meet people, I think is really important as well. Again, has someone come down to meet you and greet you by name? Have you been offered a drink or a glass of water? Do you actually get to see the site that you're going to be working at? If you're going to be working remotely, do you get some time with your new colleagues that you can have a chat with to make sure that actually you're going to get on well? You're going to be able to communicate and talk together and have that great experience. Do you get a chance to walk around the site perhaps without the hiring manager? Often or not, people will do that. So there's some other things that people are doing, and I've seen effective for people. I think if you can, organizations can really put those processes in and tighten up that process, and more importantly, that they're checking in all the time with those candidates, over communicating. I think often or not, the biggest issue that people have is when they don't know what's going on. Am I still being considered for that role? You hear it all the time. People have had an interview. I had an interview 2 weeks ago and I've not heard anything back. People would rather, I'm sure, hear they're not interested, or actually something's happened or slowed down, or they've gone for an internal candidate, or something's changed, rather than hearing nothing at all. That silence, that radio silence, is the worst thing you can do. So even where possible, even if you don't have any news, even if you don't have any news or any news to give, just give some news, keep people engaged, keep people updated. So I'd love to hear any other comments on this. Is good. I think we're going to have a guest on talking about candidate experience next week. So I would love to share that with you, and hopefully get some insight and get some knowledge about what people are facing when they're having the interview process, more so than the offer process and the onboarding stage. So thanks for all the comments today. Really enjoyed reading through them. If you've got a burning subject that you want to discuss on LinkedIn, I'd love to have a chat with you. And have a nice evening.